Welcome, everybody. Today is one of my favorite days. This is our Canadian Roundtable, and anybody that's been listening to us has been absolutely enthralled with Heidi McKillop. She is a movie mogulist and did the A Stranded Nation and is the CEO of ASN Productions. And we have Terry Edom, and he is the author of Fossil Fuel Insanities. And we did the joke a little while ago that I had to sign my own copy, so that we have to bring this up for our next guest. He says, Stuart, you're the best podcast host in the industry, Grumpy Terry Edom. And with that, we have a very, very special guest today. We have Greg McLean. He is the Conservative Member of Parliament for the Calgary Centre. And welcome very much, Greg. We sure appreciate you.
Well, Stu, thank you for having me here today. Much appreciated.
Before we get started in this, I saw some things going around between you and Terry. And would you mind telling us your side of the story? And then we want to hear what Grumpy was going on there.
You got to tell me which that was, because we've been back and forth a few times, Terry.
We've had coffee and stuff too. I wrote a post and I was whining about a lot of things, which is why Stu calls me Grumpy. And I was on politician's case for something, and I can't remember exactly what it was. And Greg reached out and said, made some comment about it was pretty funny or something. I can't remember what it was. I said, oh yeah, I guess politicians actually do pay attention to this sort of stuff. So, but then after that, we had coffee and had a great conversation, and it was a good eye opener for me. It's a good lesson never to shoot from the hip without understanding.
No, not at all. I'm a new politician. I just got elected 2 years ago in Calgary Centre, and I displaced a Liberal that preceded me, who the government in Canada is still a Liberal government because they have a majority of the seats, or not quite a full majority, what we call a minority government. So not quite enough to govern by fiat, which is what they're used to doing, but enough to carry the balance here. And I'm a Conservative member. I stepped out of my career as a portfolio manager in managing institutional funds and advising on that in order to get in and try and fix the message on oil and gas and how it contributes to our way of life here in Canada. The importance of what we're doing here is fundamental. It's not as if we're taking a business that isn't created by a great amount of demand and necessity in the world at this point in time.
So, Terry and Heidi and I have talked about the importance of oil for your province. I mean, the whole thing in Canada, the whole country is importing oil. In fact, I saw a tweet this morning that there is an Iranian tanker with 2 million barrels of oil that is coming into Canada. What are your thoughts on how do we fix this of making Canada a energy strong player? You guys are so great with ESG and taking care of the environment with the regulations, best in the world. What are your thoughts on how we go forward?
Well, thanks for recognizing that, because Canadian public companies are the ones that have been leading the world at this point in time on the whole ESG format. Before ESG was popular, Canadian companies were ESG. I had a good meeting with Enbridge, which is one of the largest pipeline companies in North America, earlier this week, and they've been doing ESG statements published for 20 years now. They've been leading this effort to make sure that they have goals as far as the environmental goals. One thing I always like to say is the thing about environmental, the E in environmental, most of it should be set by governments, not by some other organizations that say, okay, we want you to move in this direction. Governments should be in charge of making sure that the environmental goals we're trying to attain in society are reaching and making sure we can accomplish something at the end of the day, as opposed to some nebulous bean counter somewhere else. We're accountable to the public. And this is a public good if you think about the environment. So Who should be responsible and accountable to the public for the cost and the betterment of that public good? The people we elect. That's what democracy is about.
That's a fantastic statement, but this brings up our Terry and I had been talking about how do we get to renewables. It's not whether or not we need to go to renewables. We do need to go to renewables. It's how we get there. And Terry, your comment the other day about politicians being kind of frustrating when you have went off on everything on politicians. How would you address the left side of the Canadian politics if everybody's voting in the non-conservative? Terry, what would you say about voting in the non-conservative and then making them being able to set the precedents? How would that impact oil?
Well, at the end of the day, it will impact it. I think we have to get there the hard way, though. There's a fundamental lack of knowledge about how energy works at the highest levels in Ottawa, and you can see it when they're trying to dismantle a system before it's ready, and they're trying to replace it with something rapidly, and they feel that we have to save humanity, but you just can't do that. You can't take something apart that quickly and replace it. Not that's monolithic the way the energy industry is. I'm encouraged to see some signs with, like Greg mentioned, Enbridge and TransCanada and you're seeing they're thought out plans on how we're going to integrate hydrogen or whatever. And like Greg said, Enbridge built their first wind farm. So they've been producing ESG reports forever, and they built their first wind farm in 2002. Right. So they've been at this for a long time. They understand what a true energy transition is going to look like, and they're acting on it as fast as they can. And we should be paying attention to those people rather than the people that don't understand energy at all, saying we're going to eliminate whatever by this date. But you don't even have no game plan. And then the support pillars of their game plan, they'll point to something like the International Energy Agency reports, who put out a roadmap to net zero by 2050. And it made all the headlines. They said, oh, the IEA has a roadmap to net zero to 2050. But if you actually read the report, they're quite open in there, like half of the technology required doesn't exist yet. Well, how do you plan for anything when you're going to use something that doesn't exist yet? And the months prior to that IEA report, they had put out a much quieter report saying, here's the mineral requirements to actually get to the net zero. If we proceed the way governments are wanting us to, European governments and Canadian governments and Biden, if we proceed along that path, we're going to need 4 times the number of mines that we have right now to produce all the minerals for this. And if anyone pays any attention at all to the mining sector or building any infrastructure, you know how challenging it is to build a mine. The stat that they used in that report was that it takes on average 16 years from conception to production for a mine. Then that's historical. Looking forward, that has to be much longer for regulatory reasons. Everything takes much longer. So you're talking about probably, and this is probably a conservative guess, but 20 plus years to get new mines in place, because they get opposed everywhere now. Around the world, there's more opposition building. So that when you dig into the even if you accept that end post that they think we're going to get to net zero by 25, if you start digging into what do you mean by how that's going to happen, it just crumbles. The strategies just don't make sense. But then you turn around and you see companies like Enbridge and TransCanada, and you go, that's how it's going to happen. They're building it on real infrastructure with real plans. And so,
can I add to that, Stu? May I add to that?
Absolutely. And I got another question for you, Greg.
Yeah. So Terry commented about the mining footprint that we're going to have to develop in order to get to this transition. What he's talking about is, of course, by and large, the alternative energy platforms. What some of those, alternative energy platforms are electric vehicles. And, I've been in this investing business for a long time. 30 years ago, the grade of copper that we mined in the world was 1.7%. The grade of copper we mine today is 0.85%. So almost exactly half of what we were mining 30 years ago. You take that and you extrapolate going forward here about where the reserves of copper are in the world, and you're going to have to mine a whole bunch more ore if we continue to degrade our grades of copper ore in what we're mining. That means a whole bunch more energy that's expended in mining that copper. This is something that isn't even on most people's horizon about how we
know that myself. Yeah.
And I'll tell you as well, people don't seem to have their eye on the ball here, that electric vehicles, the batteries in electric vehicles are not a power source. They're a power storage source. So when you're talking about disaggregating a whole bunch of internal combustion engines and the power that comes from that, it's about a third of the power that's actually expended in our society. You have to replace that with something, and it isn't batteries. Batteries have to be fueled from somewhere else. So show me where the power comes from that's going to replace 1/3 of the power consumed in Canada right now. You're going to have to you're going to have to construct a whole bunch more hydroelectric dams, and there aren't that many sites. You're going to have to construct a whole bunch more nuclear, and that's going to take at least a decade and a half to get those moving forward. Whole bunch of hurdles here. People have not thought about the end game start to finish. They're just dancing around the edges.
Wow. When you get a wow out of Terry and myself, that's important. That's impressive.
That's some statistic. Yeah.
That is outstanding. Well done. Did I just compliment you? Sorry about that.
It sounded like it. Don't worry, it's going to be a long interview.
This is fun. This is greatness. And when you talk about, I have to apologize for the US kind of really not having good relationships with the Canadian side with Enbridge, with canceling the pipeline and those kind of things. So my apologies on behalf of not everybody. I'm a Canadian fan.
We're in the same boat. Yeah.
Yeah. And Stu, let me Enbridge is actually doing very well. Enbridge has a very good government relations department. And I'm pleased to see that the government of Canada finally took up our recommendation in demanding that we invoke the Transit Pipeline Treaty to ensure that Line 5 continued operating. And the Biden administration finally acknowledged that, okay, if we break this treaty, we're going to have to break a whole bunch of more treaties. We're going to be seen as an unreliable treaty maker all around the world. So that has actually gained some significance over the last month and a half or so. I think it was October 4th, when our then Foreign Affairs Minister pressured the US to do exactly what we've been saying for several months now. So
where was that group, Greg, when we were trying to get the Keystone built? I mean, that same group.
Well, I think, sorry to jump in here, but I think industry has to bear some of the burden for the hole that we're into, the energy industry. Forever, they've not done a great job of voicing their own position and stating it clearly and articulately, the benefits of hydrocarbons. And I saw that with the 4 executives testifying before Congress in the US, was it a week or two ago?
Yeah.
They got hauled on the carpet by a very angry panel, and they played defense the whole time. And at the end, one of the congressmen, I think it was a congressman, sorry if I got the terminology right, but he lectured the panel and he said, this was a disgusting attack and you deserve an apology. You heat our homes, you fuel our vehicles, you get the kids to soccer practice. And it was that's exactly what these executives, I would have hoped to hear the executives say. There are environmental impacts to our way of life, absolutely, and we have to sort through them and we have to make them better. But you can't discount the benefits of what you're getting, but I didn't hear it. So,
Greg, last month we got a lot of traction on our podcast because Terry and Heidi and I created the NOPAC, North American Producers of Oil and Gas Trading, so that we would have all the trade, all the heavy oil out of the Canada oil sands and Mexico. We're producing so much gas for Mexico. If we just traded nicely with us under the NAFTA, which is already in place, just make it a NOPEC under it. I think you'd be a fantastic leader of that organization. So all those in favor of voting for you and negotiating that.
Sure. A new president. Yeah.
A new president. There you go. And then I think your chief of staff, Patrick, would also be great governing that.
Sounds good to me. We really have to get a North American energy strategy together. And this requires that we actually get past all the political noise that's happening, because the last thing our citizens and your citizens need is to enter into energy poverty. And that's the path we're going right now. Recognizing there are emissions with oil and gas. There are emissions, there are environmental effects with every energy solution out there, including nuclear, including hydro. There are footprints that we are going to have to reduce as much as we can. And the thing I like about oil and gas is in the last 20 years, we have reduced our footprint significantly. Mm-hmm. If the rest of our Canadian economy had reduced their environmental footprint the same way the industry has in oil and gas, we wouldn't be worrying about meeting our Paris targets, if you will. We'd be far exceeding them. The whole issue is to make sure we're actually moving forward on what the actual environmental effects are. So many of the solutions I see for getting rid of oil and gas require replacements that have an environmental footprint that is often much worse than the one we're already moving towards. So let's continue to make sure we bet on the industry that's actually proven results so far and get that imprint, that environmental footprint down as low as possible.
Oh, Terry and I have, and Heidi have talked about we've had studies even as much as a year ago, 2 years ago, that from our team that show the more we go to fossil fuel, I mean, the more we go to renewables, the more fossil fuels we're going to use. And take a look at California. It's got the highest expensive kilowatt per hour to their citizens, and they're using more coal now than they were before. Hypocrisy is a real problem. And Terry, I'm going to ask both of you. I'm going to start with you, Greg. One question on hypocrisy, not yours, but because I like the way you think on all these things. So that I don't want any clips coming out of this, on that one. But we've always said, what about giving up some of your power needs in order to give to other countries that are not as electrified? What are your thoughts on some kind of program to encourage, hey, how about a tax rebate if you give up this much power so that we can give it away to somebody else? I mean, just some kind of humanitarian thoughts. I'm pulling that out of the woods there, and then I'll give that over to Terry after this. So your thoughts on anything that would help move this forward?
Yeah, well, let's look at the world right now. 7.7 billion people. Okay, how many of those people are actually consuming in the type of to produce the type of lifestyle that we have in North America?
Right.
Because we do have a footprint, an environmental footprint in so many areas, including a carbon footprint that has led to a lifestyle that people 50 years ago would not have dreamt about. Okay,
Right.
How much of that do we have to let go in order for the world to actually move up to a really good standard? Okay, that is the question, and that's going to cost money. So if we want to say, look, we can't go to Banana Republic and buy a new outfit every 5 weeks, because that's got a carbon footprint, in the production and, actually moving forward. But even that decision has some worldwide impact, because if we stop consuming, we're gonna have to stop producing. And
Right.
many of those goods are produced in places like Bangladesh, other places in Asia, that are increasing their carbon footprint measurably, but also increasing their standard of living. So even though a sweatshop, and I hate to say this because the sweatshop stories we've seen are awful, the people working in those places were previously dying on the streets. So we are talking about continuing to elevate human outcomes around the world, and that's causing a carbon footprint. I always tell people, walk into Home Depot, take a walk down the packaged aisles and see if 90 to 95% of everything isn't produced in Asia. Well, it might be produced in Asia because it's got cheap labor in Asia and
Right.
cheap power produced from coal, and we're consuming it here. So you want to talk about border carbon adjustments, we're doing that all here. We're pushing our jobs over to cheap jurisdictions, which isn't just cheap labor that we
Right.
stand against here in North America, but it's also cheap power produced with coal that we are shunning here in North America for some good reasons. So there we are, okay, how do we adjust our lifestyle to recognize that all our consumption is based on a business model that says make things cheaper somewhere else. Don't worry, we'll make ourselves look very pure here, but our actual outcomes are significantly worse because producing something somewhere else requires a huge shipping footprint to get us our goods at the end of the day. So there's our conundrum as far as how we get where we're going around the world. Whatever button you push is going to require a lever being pulled somewhere else. There is no magic solution. No easy button, as you say, when you walk in the store.
Terry, your thoughts?
Yeah, that's true. And I would just add to that there's 4 billion people that are up and coming that want our lifestyle too. So that's just going to compound the problem. And you've heard that loud and clear from the African delegation and India, and in particular at COP26, saying, you guys cut your emissions if you want, like we're just getting going. And Africa in particular is saying we have a chance to develop our hydrocarbon industry. And why wouldn't we? We want to alleviate energy poverty too. And that's taps onto one other thing that I just wanted to mention about raging at the government again, but the lack of a strategic vision, like Greg makes an eloquent point there of how challenging it's going to be to get there. The thing you have to do is to make the best choice you can along the way to find the most logical path to get there. Right now, we have a situation where if you put up your hand and say, I'm going to build a solar farm, money shows up on your doorstep. There's subsidies. People want to buy it. All of the water's part to make it easy for you to do that. Or wind farm. I have a friend working for a little lithium company. They're trying to extract lithium out of brine water underground in Saskatchewan. And if you're buying into the need to get to net zero by 2050, lithium is one of the key components. Canada doesn't even have a lithium strategy. We don't have a mineral inventory that I've been able to find. Maybe Greg knows. I searched on the web for like what is I found old geological studies about estimates of how much lithium might be in underground water in the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin, but we don't even understand this. We have these little companies out there struggling to raise money, paying for their own wells, doing the R&D work, and the government is setting up a net zero advisory body in Ottawa filled with union activists, climate activists, and they're the ones that are driving the bus. And even by their own program, if you want to follow that, we just don't have any vision. And it ties into even a North American energy strategy. We should be using our oil and gas resources. They should be connected to the refineries in the US that want that type of oil.
Right.
We should be benefiting in Canada. You should be benefiting in the US. We should be having a program where you have that healthy industry, which is fueling R&D, which is tax incentivized for these new types of things. And you should have government saying, we need a total map of the landscape. Where can we access minerals? Where are they? How hard is it going to be? What First Nations, Indigenous peoples we have to engage to make this happen? Yeah. What percentage of ownership should they have to make it happen? Which I think is a great development too. So there's just we're running around like the proverbial chicken with its head cut off, it seems like, and getting nowhere, as you see in COP26. Every big advancement they've put forward gets shot down, including the EU, which voted down nuclear power as a green source of energy. So, and they're the linchpins of this whole transition thing. So every solution that kind of pops up, which seems to make sense, gets shot down by someone or the other. So at the very start, we need some wisdom and a strategy. So yeah.
Greg, you alluded to this a little bit earlier, and I love energy tech is not there yet for the energy tech. And how is Canada going to be able, or what are your thoughts on the Canadian government being able to help, like Terry said, the smaller players to get energy tech so that we can get to the renewable side? Because your finance background is wonderful. Any thoughts on improving energy tech?
Well, yeah, I've got some thoughts on that. Energy tech, of course, is what's going to get us through this at the end of the day.
Right.
A technology that continues to reduce our footprint, our environmental footprint through and through, but also gets us more energy returned over energy invested. When I used to invest in energy, alternative and regular, the whole formula was how much energy you get out of this as opposed to the energy you invest. At that point in time, this goes back a decade, we wouldn't invest in biofuels because there's more energy going into producing biofuels than comes out the other end. That is a formula you cannot continue to spin the wheel on. You've got to identify where we're actually creating more problem than we're solving. So that's one of the issues we look at the end of the day, is how much energy you're getting out of this equation versus what you're putting into it. And that energy includes, of course, production energy, human energy, everything else that's an expenditure in the process. Terry talked about the EU, and the EU is, I often think, much like Canada and the US, and we have to make sure we manage our relationship with our most important trading partner in the world, and that is an international relationship, if you will, that showed some strain lately, both in the last administration, but also in the new administration. I often say, the Liberal government always was really demonizing your previous president, and nothing's changed much in the way the trade happens between our countries and our USMCA, which used to be called, as you know. And they're effectively, they were trying to play the song, ding dong, the witch is dead, but they should be playing, meet the new boss, same as the old boss, because nothing's gotten any better as far as our trade relationships in aluminum and steel and everything else.
Right.
Things continue to get worse. And this has to change. We've got to have a good binational relationship with the United States, particularly on energy, particularly on resources. We talked about lithium. We talked about rare earth metals. Now, we did a study at the committee in Parliament that I was the vice chair of on actual rare earth metals strategy for Canada. The part about it I liked is we had an opposition report. You're allowed to, the government puts out their report and we all have to agree on it. We put out a opposition report, and the media here in Ottawa in Eastern Canada picked up on our report because it was much more fulsome about what we need to do. I mean, all kinds of pundits in Ottawa, all kinds of rent seekers, we call them, get there and say, you need to fund us, you need to fund us, you need to fund us. But you need to look at what's happened to the funding in that industry so far. How many rare earth metals in Canada, miners, have done that flip over, going bankrupt, recapitalizing dead companies, starting again with more government money? So how much money, government money, gets churned into it? Because the commodity market, like every other commodity market, goes up and down. And when it's down, financing is unviable. When it's up, sure, you've got all kinds of government money coming at it and investor money.
Right.
You've got to have a way to stabilize that. So we recommended an actual bank of these rare earth metals be actually set up by our governments to make sure that we don't get whipsawed on the world stage, because most of the rare earth metals in the world right now are produced in one country, and that's where all the industry is going, and that would be China. So if we're going to have a North American strategy on actually building a value-added rare earth metals industry, including batteries, cars, everything else, we're going to have to start with the commodity that's going to be part of that process. Lithium, the other word, dysprosium, everything else we're mining for here in Canada.
Wow. Greg, I just really appreciate you, and I just really appreciate your time and your candor and your knowledge. This has been very informative. I mean, when you get a wow out of Greg and I, this is kind of cool. And I'd love to have you back again when you have something to really, we love to get it out there. And I'm going to give Terry his last thoughts, and then we'd like to roll over to you for your last thoughts. And we want to know, Greg, in a minute, what you got coming up and your last thoughts on anything. So Terry, what are your last thoughts here?
So I've been writing for a long time, I started writing because the messaging was poor coming out of our industry. When I was in the pipeline industry, people weren't understanding energy and we're trying to transition too quickly. And I have a very bad feeling that there's a lot of bad things that are going to happen in the world. You see these potential energy shortages. China's short of coal, India's short of coal, Europe's short of natural gas. They're all short of natural gas. And hopefully we skate through with a mild winter for all of them and there's no problems. But the chickens are going to come home to roost, and I don't see good days ahead unless there's some sanity that lands in energy markets.
Yep. And so, Greg, the floor is yours for your last words. We want to know what's coming around the corner for you and what you think of Canada, and we just really appreciate you as a great neighbor.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I'm going to say a few things here, one of which is that I just came through an election. So we had a very divisive election again here in Canada. And I'll tell you, here in Calgary Centre, I had 4 opponents, one of which is a Christian heritage. So they always run a religious person, and he's the same candidate as always. But the other 3 were a Liberal, a New Democratic Party representative, and a Green Party. And every one of those people running against me had barely held a job. Okay. Now, I only won by 51% and change kind of thing. So, a slight majority of people voted for me in my riding. And my wife is going, you look at the experience of their people they're voting for, and why would, she expected me to have 85% of the vote if people just looked at the resumes of the people that were putting themselves forward. But this is democracy. And perhaps this is a problem with democracy that we need to address right now, is that no matter what you do, you put your name on a ballot, you have no experience to bring this equation. You're just reiterating talking lines of something that has gotten you so far. Here's your package where you're in our party, go say this. We don't encourage politicians that actually know anything anymore to get involved in Parliament. And I can see why, after having been there 2 years now, because it's always, the narrative is going uphill. We don't get rewarded, i.e. more voters coming to us, by
Right.
actually putting tangible solutions on the table, you get rewarded by the media, by the voters, by hyperbolic statements like we're going to do this. And it's an absolutely ridiculous statement sometimes. But this is democracy. We need to have a better understanding of democracy and how democracy, the accountability of politicians for the outcomes at the end of the day, is where society has to wear it. Because otherwise, we're just handing over that accountability and the money, the wealth transfer, if you will, to other parties. And that's something people need to get their eyes wrapped around here. Who's making money in this process right now? And who's going to be responsible for that? I guarantee you, I know who's responsible. It's the taxpayer. Take a look at where money's shifting in our society right now, which isn't into the pockets of regular people.
No. Well, I'll tell you what, I just can't believe how much fun I had and how much I learned with both of you. And, we got some action items out of here. We got to get the North America Trade Association of producing energy for Canada, Mexico, and you're going to be the head schmo on that bad dog, and as we say in Texas. And we also need to figure out how to get all of our energy tech to run down the road together. But man, I can't even begin to tell you how much I appreciate this. And this will be rolling out next week, and we'll tag everybody. All your contact information will be there and where to donate. But again, thank you.
I'm not allowed to accept funds from the United States, but thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you, guys.
Much appreciated. Thanks for having me, Steve.